A neighborhood woman tried to shame my daughter for looking different, not realizing her judgment would bring her face to face with a police officer. Me. My daughter Lily had only been out of the hospital for a week when she decided she was ready to step outside again. At just 10 years old, she had endured more in a year than most people face in a lifetime. Her hair was gone, her body thin, but her spirit remained bright. That morning, she wanted nothing more than to feel the sun on her skin and hear the birds sing. She stood quietly in our front yard, her bald head uncovered for the first time. That's when the shouting started. From across the street came the voice of our HOA's self-appointed neighborhood watchdog, a woman known for her complaints and her need to control everything around her. She didn't ask questions or show concern. She assumed. Within seconds, she was accusing Lily of suspicious behavior and holding her phone like a weapon. "I'm calling the police," she snapped, as if she had caught a criminal in the act. What she didn't realize was that the officer she was calling for was already present. I walked outside, my badge clipped clearly to my chest. "If you'd like to speak to the police," I said, "you're speaking to one now." Lily was always the kind of child who noticed the little things. She'd stop on a walk to point out a butterfly no one else had seen or ask if trees could miss the wind when the air was still. She was gentle, kind, and thoughtful in a way that felt wise beyond her years. When she first started feeling tired all the time, we thought it was just a growth spurt. She'd always been active, running around with the neighborhood kids, climbing trees, and riding her bike like she had wings on her back. But one afternoon, she fell asleep in the middle of drawing, and when we tried to wake her, she barely stirred. Something inside me knew it wasn't right. The diagnosis came fast and hit hard. Acute lymphoblastic leukemia, a name we had never heard before, but one we quickly learned to pronounce, spell, and fear. Hospital visits became routine. Lily lost weight, then her hair. Chemotherapy took its toll, leaving her pale and nauseated, and some days she could barely lift her head. But through it all, she held on to her curiosity. She asked her doctors endless questions, learned the names of every nurse, and insisted on thanking each one before they left the room. Her resilience didn't come from denial or ignorance. It came from something deep and strong that lived inside her. Watching her suffer was the most helpless I had ever felt as a father. I was trained to handle emergencies, to take control of chaos, to protect people from danger. But there was nothing I could do to fight the cells attacking my little girl. All I could do was be there, hold her hand, sit beside her bed at night, pretend to be brave when she looked at me for reassurance. My badge, my training, none of it meant anything in the face of her pain. As her treatment progressed, Lily stopped asking to go outside. She didn't want to see her friends or visit the park. She avoided mirrors. She'd pull her hoodie tight around her face when doctors walked in. I tried to remind her how beautiful she was, how proud I was of her courage, but I could see in her eyes how much she missed feeling normal. Then, on a warm spring morning, she surprised me. She came downstairs dressed and ready, her bald head uncovered, her favorite sketch pad in one hand. "I want to sit on the porch," she said. Her voice was soft but sure, just for a little while. I smiled and opened the door for her, my heart swelling with quiet pride. It wasn't a big step to the rest of the world, but for her, it meant everything. She wasn't trying to make a statement or draw attention. She simply wanted to feel the sun and remember what fresh air felt like. It was the first time in weeks that she had asked for something that didn't involve doctors or medicine. I had no idea what was about to unfold. Our neighborhood looked perfect on the surface. The lawns were manicured, the sidewalks swept clean, and American flags waved politely from porch railings. It was the kind of place people drove through and imagined raising a family, thinking everything must be safe and serene behind the neatly painted doors. But just like any other community, the surface didn't always reflect what lay underneath. At the center of most neighborhood drama was a woman named Cheryl, though no one called her that anymore. Somewhere along the line, she had become Karen, a nickname passed along in whispers and group texts, even if no one dared say it to her face. She held a clipboard during her morning walks and rarely missed an opportunity to document a chipped mailbox or a trash bin left out too long. She called it community pride. Everyone else called it something else. Karen didn't technically run the homeowners association, but she may as well have. The actual board members had long stopped challenging her, tired of the endless emails and late-night phone calls. She had a talent for turning the smallest thing into a full-blown issue. A soccer ball left on the grass could lead to a written warning. A holiday decoration left up past January became grounds for a community-wide reminder. She saw herself as the keeper of order, as if every home in the cul-de-sac existed under her personal jurisdiction. There had always been tension between us, though nothing direct. I kept to myself when I wasn't on duty, and I didn't engage in the neighborhood drama. Karen, of course, noticed everything. She had commented once in passing that my daughter's Halloween decorations were a little too scary for young kids, and she once left a note about my recycling bins not being properly aligned. I chose to ignore most of it. It wasn't worth the energy. What always struck me, though, was how quickly she judged anyone who didn't fit into her very narrow idea of what belonged. If a teenager walked down the street wearing baggy clothes, she stared. If a delivery truck idled too long, she made a call. Her smile was tight, polite when necessary, but never warm. I could see how she watched our house sometimes, especially after Lily got sick. Her eyes held questions, but never compassion. I didn't think much of it at the time. I certainly didn't think it would ever go any further than uncomfortable looks. I was wrong. Before I was a father, I was a police officer. I had been on the force for nearly 15 years, working everything from night patrols to community outreach. It wasn't just a job to me. It was a commitment I made every time I put on the uniform. I believed in the purpose behind it, in protecting people who couldn't protect themselves, in standing up when it mattered. But no training, no years on the street, had ever prepared me for watching my daughter fight cancer. Off duty, I tried to separate my work from my family life. When I walked through our front door, I became dad. Not sergeant, not officer. Just the man who packed school lunches, helped with math homework, and read bedtime stories about space and dinosaurs. I didn't hang my badge in the entryway, and I didn't talk about my work unless someone asked. I didn't need recognition or respect outside of the job. What I valued more was peace in my home. Still, it was hard to ignore how differently people treated me when they didn't know who I was. Some neighbors saw me as quiet, maybe standoffish. I wasn't interested in backyard barbecues or small talk about property values. I had seen too much in the world to worry about crabgrass or fence height. What mattered to me was keeping my daughter safe and helping her feel strong, even on the days she could barely get out of bed. Karen had no idea who I was in uniform, and I had no interest in telling her. I figured she would never give me a reason to. But life has a way of forcing two paths to cross, especially when someone forgets that behind every door is a story they haven't taken the time to understand. It was a Saturday morning, quiet and warm, with the kind of breeze that carried the smell of blooming flowers from yard to yard. I was sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee, flipping through the newspaper out of habit more than interest. Lily was upstairs getting dressed, and for once, she didn't need help. That alone made my chest feel lighter. We had turned a corner. She had asked to go outside, not just to sit on the porch but to walk around, to feel normal again, even if just for a few minutes. I looked out the window and watched her come down the driveway. She had left her hoodie inside. Her head, pale and smooth, caught the light like a beacon. She walked slowly, sketchpad tucked under her arm, sneakers brushing softly against the pavement. She made her way to the edge of our front yard and crouched near the flower bed, studying something with quiet focus. It wasn't unusual for her to draw the world around her. Lately, it had been one of the only ways she could express what she was feeling. From my spot at the table, I had a clear view of the cul-de-sac. Karen's house sat diagonally across from ours, her blinds always slightly open. I saw the curtain move. I knew she was watching. She stepped outside a moment later, arms folded tight across her chest, and started walking in our direction. Her steps were fast and deliberate, the kind that meant she had already made up her mind about something. I stood up and moved to the front door, opening it just enough to hear what was happening. I didn't want to interfere unless I had to. Lily hadn't seen her yet. She was still focused on whatever she was drawing. Karen's voice carried across the lawn. "Excuse me, little girl," she said, loud enough for the whole street to hear. "Can I ask what you're doing here?" Lily looked up, startled. Her hand tightened around her pencil. "I live here," she said, barely above a whisper. Karen frowned. "Do your parents know you're outside like this?" Her eyes moved up and down, pausing at Lily's head. "You shouldn't be wandering around looking like that. It's disturbing." I felt a heat rise in my chest. Lily stood up slowly, unsure whether to answer or retreat. Karen pulled out her phone and held it up like she was documenting a crime scene. Her voice grew sharper. "You can't just hang around like this. It makes people uncomfortable. You need to go back inside." Lily didn't respond. She turned to head toward the porch, her shoulders hunched. I stepped outside then, my voice calm but firm. "Is there a problem here?" Karen looked at me, startled. She opened her mouth but didn't speak right away. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," I said. "This is my daughter. She lives here, and she's not doing anything wrong." Karen didn't move. She just stared, her phone still in her hand. Karen seemed frozen for a moment, like she wasn't sure whether to retreat or double down. Her eyes flicked between me and Lily, and something flickered in her expression that looked a lot like embarrassment, but it didn't last. She straightened her shoulders and took a small step forward, holding her phone just a little higher. "I didn't mean to upset anyone," she said, though her voice carried the kind of tightness that suggested she believed she was still in the right. "But I saw her out here, and with the way things are these days, you never know. I thought maybe she was lost or up to something." Lily stood beside me now, her sketchpad pressed against her chest, her mouth drawn in a tight line. She wasn't crying, but her eyes were wide and glassy. I placed a hand gently on her back and kept my own expression steady. "She's 10 years old," I said. "She came out here to draw. That's it." Karen shook her head slightly. "Well, forgive me, but she doesn't look 10. Not with that shaved head. I thought maybe it was a prank or, I don't know. Gangs use kids sometimes, you know." The words landed like a slap. I took a slow breath. I could feel every muscle in my jaw tightening, but I didn't let it show. Lily's fingers curled tighter around her pencil, and I heard her take a sharp breath through her nose. "There are no gangs here," I said, still keeping my voice even. "There's a child with cancer. A child who has spent months in a hospital bed and is finally well enough to be outside again. This isn't a prank. This isn't a threat. It's a little girl trying to enjoy her front yard." Karen didn't look away, but I could see a crack forming in her confidence. She wasn't used to being challenged. Still, she glanced down at her phone and tapped the screen. "I think it's best if someone comes to check on this," she muttered. "Just to be safe. You can't be too careful." "You're calling the police?" I asked. "If there's no problem, then there's nothing to worry about," she said. "They'll sort it out." She pressed the final button and lifted the phone to her ear. I heard her begin to describe Lily, mentioning her bald head, her age, and the fact that she looked out of place in the neighborhood. She didn't say it outright, but her tone implied something sinister. I stepped back toward the door and walked inside long enough to grab my wallet. When I returned, I held up my badge, the light catching on the polished metal. "I think I can save them the trip," I said. "I'm Sergeant David Rhodes with the City Police Department. You're reporting my daughter for being outside her home." Karen stopped mid-sentence. The color drained from her face as she slowly lowered the phone. Her mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. Lily had been trying so hard to hold it together. She stood still beside me, her lips pressed tightly shut, her arms locked around her sketchpad like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. When Karen started describing her on the phone, it was as if the last bit of strength she had left slipped away. Her shoulders dropped, and her face crumpled. She turned without saying anything and hurried up the steps and through the front door. I wanted to go after her, to hold her, to tell her that none of this mattered, but I couldn't just yet. I stood there for a moment, looking at the spot where she had been. The way she had folded in on herself wasn't something I would forget. All the work she had done to feel normal again had been ripped away in minutes by someone who couldn't be bothered to ask a simple question before judging her. Behind me, I heard the front door click shut. Karen stayed where she was, staring at me like she was still trying to figure out how the situation had turned against her. Her confidence had been replaced by a kind of nervous silence. She clutched her phone in both hands now, as if she wasn't sure what to do with it. "She didn't deserve that," I said quietly. Karen didn't answer. Her eyes darted toward the sidewalk, then back to my badge. The tension that hung between us wasn't loud, but it was heavy. I waited another beat, then turned and went inside. I needed to be with my daughter. I had already let this go on longer than I should have. Right now, the only thing that mattered was making sure Lily knew she was safe. Inside, I found Lily sitting at the bottom of the stairs, her sketchpad in her lap, her arms wrapped tightly around her knees. She didn't look up when I sat beside her. Her pencil had snapped somewhere along the way, and the broken pieces lay next to her on the floor. I reached for her hand, and after a moment, she let me take it. She thought I was doing something wrong, Lily said, her voice barely above a whisper, just for being outside. She didn't understand, I replied. But that doesn't make it okay. Lily nodded slightly, but her eyes stayed on the broken pencil. I wanted to tell her that none of this would matter tomorrow, that the woman outside had no power to hurt her, but I knew better. It had already happened. She had been embarrassed in her own yard, in her own skin, and by someone who saw her illness as something strange instead of something brave. From outside, I could hear Karen's voice again. She was still on the phone, though quieter now. I couldn't make out the words. She was likely trying to explain what happened, twisting the details to sound reasonable. That didn't concern me. What mattered was how Lily felt right now. I don't want to go out again, Lily said. Not if people look at me like that. I looked at her and gave her hand a gentle squeeze. You don't have to do anything you don't want to. But if you ever change your mind, you won't be out there alone. She leaned her head against my arm. The weight of the morning settled between us, but I could feel the start of calm returning. Whatever came next, we would face it together. I walked back outside a few minutes later. Karen was still standing in the same spot, phone to her ear, speaking in a low, hurried voice. She turned when she saw me, her expression uneasy. The confidence she had shown earlier had drained from her face. Now she looked like someone who was trying to figure out how to fix a mistake before it became permanent. I already told them I called, she said quickly. They're sending someone just to make sure everything's fine. It's just protocol now. I nodded slowly. Good. I'll wait with you. She blinked at me. What? I said I'll wait. Since you made the call, we'll wait together and clear things up. Karen looked around as if hoping someone else might step in. The street was quiet. No neighbors peeking from porches. No friendly faces nearby to back her up. I walked past her to the sidewalk and stood with my arms crossed, letting the silence grow thick between us. She shifted uncomfortably. I didn't know she was sick. I just saw a girl I didn't recognize. It caught me off guard. You saw a child drawing flowers in her own yard. That's what you saw. Karen didn't respond. We stood there for another few minutes before the police cruiser rolled around the corner. I recognized the car before I saw the driver. Officer Ramirez stepped out, eyebrows raised when he saw me. Morning, Sergeant, he said. Didn't expect to see you out here. Morning, Ramirez. Karen called something in, said there was suspicious activity. I figured I'd help her explain. Ramirez looked from me to Karen, then to the house. He seemed to take in the situation without needing much detail. Karen opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. She stared at the ground instead. Ramirez nodded. Well, I don't think there's anything we need to escalate here. Sounds like a misunderstanding. That's what I told her, I said. But I appreciate you coming. Karen stood quietly, her arms crossed now, phone forgotten at her side. Ramirez gave her a polite nod before heading back to his car. I turned to Karen. You don't need a clipboard to keep a community safe. You need compassion. She didn't respond. This time, she didn't even try. After Ramirez left, Karen stood there for another moment, but the energy had drained from her completely. She looked smaller than before, like someone who had finally seen the edge of their influence. Without a word, she turned and walked back across the street to her house. The door shut quietly behind her. I stayed on the porch for a while, not because I needed to, but because I wanted to give Lily time to rest and feel safe again. Later that afternoon, I saw a few neighbors walk past our house, a little slower than usual. Some of them had clearly heard what happened, either through Karen or from watching it unfold. No one said anything, but their eyes lingered. One man gave a slight nod, the kind people give when they're not sure what to say but want you to know they're on your side. The police report was never filed. Ramirez had already marked it as resolved before he drove off. I knew it wouldn't go any further through the department. He understood what the situation had been, and he handled it with the quiet professionalism I had always respected in him. For the rest of the day, the street stayed calm. Karen didn't come back outside, and no one knocked on our door. The air felt lighter, even if just a little. I went inside and checked on Lily. She was lying on the couch with a blanket pulled up to her chin and her sketchpad resting on the floor nearby. She looked up when I came in and gave me a tired smile. I sat beside her, not needing to say anything. She leaned against me again, and we stayed there until the sun began to dip behind the rooftops. By the middle of the next week, word of what had happened had spread through the neighborhood. I hadn't spoken to anyone about it, but stories travel fast when they touch a nerve. People who normally kept to themselves began stopping me on the sidewalk, asking gentle questions about Lily and expressing quiet support. Some just offered a nod or a kind smile. Others apologized for not stepping in sooner or for not noticing how much she had been through. The Homeowners Association called a meeting for that Thursday evening. It wasn't officially about the incident, but everyone knew why the community room was suddenly full. Karen sat near the back. Her usual confidence dimmed. She didn't speak during the meeting. She didn't make eye contact with me or anyone else. The room felt tense when I stood up to speak, but I didn't raise my voice or point fingers. I told them what Lily had been through. I told them how proud I was of her for going outside, for trying to find a sense of normal again. I explained how damaging it is when someone rushes to judgment without knowing the full story. I asked them to think twice the next time they saw someone who looked different or acted in a way they didn't expect. Not everyone's pain is visible. Not every story is obvious. When I finished, the room was quiet. A few people clapped softly, and then more joined in. Karen didn't. She gathered her papers and left before the meeting was over. Later that night, one of the board members stopped by my house. She handed me a written letter from the HOA, formally stating that Karen's behavior had violated their code of conduct. It wasn't dramatic, but it meant something. Someone was finally paying attention. The next morning, Lily woke up earlier than usual. She came downstairs dressed and ready, her sketchpad tucked under her arm like it always had been before she got sick. I asked if she was hungry, but she shook her head and walked to the front door. She paused there, looking out through the glass, her fingers tapping lightly against the edge of her sketchpad. "Do you want to go out?" I asked. She nodded once. I opened the door, and she stepped onto the porch without hesitation. The sunlight hit her face, and for the first time in days, I saw a little spark in her eyes. She walked to the same spot in the yard where everything had happened, crouched down, and opened her pad to a fresh page. Her pencil moved slowly at first, but then it found its rhythm. A few minutes later, our next-door neighbor, Mrs. Jameson, walked over. She was carrying a tray of muffins and a small bouquet of flowers. She didn't say much, just placed them on the porch table and gave Lily a warm smile. Lily smiled back. One by one, other neighbors came by. Some brought cards, others brought small gifts or just kind words. No one mentioned Karen by name. They didn't have to. Their actions said more than enough. By late afternoon, the porch was filled with color, notes of encouragement, drawings from other kids, a tiny potted plant with a ribbon tied around it. Lily sat quietly, taking it all in. She didn't say much, but her expression softened with every gesture. It wasn't a grand event. There were no speeches or formal apologies, but the street that once made her feel small now felt a little more like home again. That was all she needed. Karen showed up 2 days later with a small envelope in her hand and a look that tried to pass for sincere. She knocked once and stood stiffly on the porch until I answered. Her eyes flicked toward the spot where Lily usually sat, but my daughter wasn't there. She was inside, helping her mother with a puzzle. "I wanted to drop this off," Karen said, holding out the envelope. "An apology for the misunderstanding." I took it but didn't open it. She shifted her weight from one foot to the other, waiting for me to say something that might make it easier for her. I didn't. "It wasn't personal," she added. "I was trying to look out for the neighborhood." I gave a quiet nod and thanked her, not because I believed her, but because I didn't want to give her the reaction she was fishing for. She looked past me one more time, then gave a small, forced smile and turned away. After she left, I opened the envelope. It was a short note, typed and unsigned. The words were careful, vague, and cold. It didn't mention Lily by name. It didn't mention me. It was for her conscience, not for our healing. We didn't keep it. The weekend brought more visitors. Some were neighbors we barely knew, people who had lived just a few houses away for years without ever sharing more than a wave. They stopped by with flowers, balloons, and homemade cards. Kids from the block brought chalk and covered the driveway with bright pictures and kind messages for Lily. One girl, no older than 7, gave Lily a drawing of a sun with the words "You are brave" written in crayon underneath. Lily smiled and hugged it like it was something rare. It wasn't loud or planned. No one sent out invitations or created a schedule. People just showed up because they wanted to, because they had seen something they couldn't ignore. For the first time since Lily got sick, it felt like the neighborhood had opened its eyes. They weren't just reacting to one woman's mistake, they were choosing kindness. Lily sat on the porch most of that day. She wore a soft blue cap that her grandmother had knitted, though she took it off after a while. Her bare head caught the light again, and this time, no one stared in confusion. They looked at her with respect, some with tears. We didn't ask for anything. We never wanted attention or sympathy. But when people bring light to what was once a dark place, it matters. It shows that change can happen, even if it starts with something painful. By the end of the day, the porch was filled with color and life. Neighbors sat and talked. Children played in the grass. Lily sketched everything she saw, her pencil moving quickly from one image to the next. She was quiet, but her smile stayed with her. It was the first real one I had seen in a long time. The next morning, Lily came downstairs wearing jeans and a hoodie. She pulled the hood up, then paused, thinking. Slowly, she reached up and pulled it back down. Her head remained bare. She didn't say anything about it. She just looked at me and nodded, the kind of small gesture that said more than words ever could. We walked outside together. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft glow over the houses. Lily held her sketch pad against her chest, her steps steady and calm. She stopped at the end of the driveway and looked around. Nothing felt threatening anymore. The street looked the same, but it felt different. Across the road, Karen stood at her window. The curtain moved slightly, just enough to see her silhouette. She didn't come outside. She didn't wave. She just watched, her face unreadable. Lily noticed her too, but didn't react. She turned her eyes back to the sidewalk and kept walking. We moved side by side, taking slow steps down the street. A few neighbors waved from their porches. One of the kids on a bike shouted her name and rode a wide circle around us. Lily gave him a quiet smile. She didn't hide who she was. She didn't flinch when people looked. She had faced more than anyone her age should have to, and she stood in the middle of our quiet neighborhood like someone who had earned every inch of peace that morning brought. We didn't speak much during that walk. We didn't need to. Each step forward meant something. Each moment of silence was full of understanding. There was no longer any fear, only strength. And as we walked past the rows of houses, I knew without question that Lily would never walk alone again.